Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Today we have for you the Raise the Bar, Upping Your Game, Engaging a Turnaround Leader for Future Success with Jennifer Tersigny, who is the principal and lead consultant for Raise the Bar Consulting. Just some tech. This is in a webinar format, so you do not have access to unmute yourself or use your video, but if anyone has questions that they would like to pose in person towards the end of the presentation, we can definitely unmute you for that. Or if you have questions throughout the presentation that you don't want to forget, there is, if you scroll down the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A option, and I ask that you send any questions, put any questions there so that we don't lose it in the chat, but feel free to use the chat as well to talk amongst yourselves or make any comments. All right, and at this point, I am going to turn it over to Jennifer.
Thanks, Cynthia. I am just thrilled to be joining you all today and talking about this topic, which I love, and that's engaging a turnaround leader for future success. Part and parcel of using an interim executive and thinking through transitional leadership when you are considering an executive change or you're presented with one. Again, as Cynthia mentioned, please send us a chat at any time if you have any questions. This is the first time I'm actually using, maybe the second time I'm using a webinar format. I usually do these in more of a meeting format. So I'm getting used to not seeing some of you. I love to hear from folks when I present. So please share your thoughts and share your questions as we go. So a few webinar objectives. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is succession planning and why is it important. And even though that might seem remedial, I think it's really crucial, because if you're presented with a situation and you don't know what to do, it's easy to make a well-intentioned decision that could be costly for the organization. We're going to talk about some opportunities in times of transition. We're going to talk about when a professional interim executive might be right for you and your organization. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how to find an interim who is a turnaround leader, because not all of us are, and that's okay, but you need to know what you need and how to go about finding it when you are faced with certain situations. So why do we want to talk about succession planning? Well, first, because people don't stay in a job forever. That should not be new news, but interestingly, what we know about organizational succession planning is that it follows trends of estate planning, and that about the same percentage of organizations plan for transition as people who actually write a trust or a will, which is around 35 to 40% of organizations and individuals. So most people aren't doing this. Most organizations aren't doing it. I think many organizations feel like there's time and don't feel the urgency, but then when presented with an issue, try to hit the ground running. And sometimes no matter how fast you try to run, it's not fast enough. So the mission and the work of the organization continues, right? Despite turnover and despite change. The best decisions are often made in peacetime, in a time when you have time to be reflective and introspective and plan and not make decisions based out of fear, stress, and anxiety. So life opportunities and change happen. And I think that 3 to 5 years ago when I was giving this presentation, it may not have had the same effect or resonated in the same way with people as it does now. But I think having all been through 2020 and COVID and all of the changes that we've all experienced in our lives, in our work, in our workplaces, I think we all see now that at any point in time, change can happen and it can be big. And if you know how to enact your crisis response, if you will, you're ahead of the game, right? So what is succession planning? Well, I always consider it an intentioned plan or roadmap that's used in transition. I think it's great when organizations can have a plan for their CEOs and senior leadership, and of course, when boards can have plans for board members. We want to include strategies that are identified to meet emerging needs, capitalize on future opportunities, and address current challenges. It's great to have contingency plans to respond to the most predictable of transition scenarios. There might always be a one in a million kind of scenario you didn't anticipate. I'm not suggesting trying to plan for absolutely every scenario, but you'll see that there are a few common ones that you can begin to plan and think through right now. And it also provides your organization, the board of directors in particular, a methodical way to identify and develop emerging internal leaders for leadership roles and to help to support your internal team and growth within your organization, if that's something that you aspire to as an organization, while your executive is still there, rather than having to be confronted with what do we do about a particular internal candidate who wants the job and kind of throws us off our search game, if you will. All right, so current research shows that only 34% of boards have a written plan for the departure, a written succession plan for the departure of their CEO. In the next, this says 5 to 8 years, it's probably closer to 3 to 5 now from what I'm reading. We're going to see many leaders of organizations turn over. In fact, just yesterday, I read an article and I thought it was a little high, but I read an article saying that 95% of people are considering a job change as they return to work from COVID. I mean, that is just unprecedented. And even if it's only half true, that's really a lot of people. And then, of course, the retirement factor. I mean, baby boomers are looking to retire. And that, of course, has already started, seeking less demanding and more flexible work. But now the entire workplace, after many people being home and working remotely for more than a year, are looking for a lot of these benefits and flexibility as well, sometimes on the part of the employee and sometimes on the part of the employer. Employers have also realized in the last year, at least some of them, that there could be some benefits to having a remote office, having fewer sites to operate and manage, to having fewer capital overhead expenses and other kinds of dynamics that are faced in the workplace when everyone's under one roof. And so while some organizations, while some businesses are moving to bring people back, others are actually not doing that at all, right? And so your succession plan now also needs to be very mindful of how it is you want employees to operate in the near future. All right, so lots of people ask, how do I go about starting a succession plan? I just want to put this in there, not spend too much time on it today, but basically just to say, approach this topic with your board, schedule time to just begin the discussion. I think it's always great to do it just as part of regular routine strategic planning. You can also add a special succession planning initiative as part of your routine strategic planning processes, which these days should be every 2 to 3 years. Ideally, if you're an organization that's very dynamic, that's growing, that's healthy, you're going to revisit that plan, not just annually, but you're going to be using your plan as a dynamic roadmap to your future. If you're not quite doing that yet, at least reviewing these documents annually or biannually and working to refresh and improve your plans is a great place to be. And then sometimes it can be a tough discussion to start or to have. And so considering bringing a third-party facilitator in for that, just like for strategic planning, it might be something your group would want to do. So when you start your plan, considering whether you want it to be CEO only, CEO on board, CEO and leadership team, or all of the above, considering your internal leadership pipeline strategy, whether you have one. I mean, it's okay to admit if you don't have one. Many nonprofits do not have a very fortified internal leadership pipeline strategy. And thinking too about the organizational resources and capacity you have to support the rise of internal leaders, to support professional development, to engage a consultant or a transitional leader, or professional interim or other kinds of consulting during your transitions. It's important to consider a lot of those things in advance. All right, these are some contingency scenarios I like to encourage folks to consider as you are planning for transition. So CEOs planned departure in a relatively healthy organization. We can deconstruct that, but I think we all know what we mean by that, or know enough what we mean by that, right? An unplanned departure with a relatively healthy organization, a termination by the board of directors in a healthy organization. And I differentiate termination from unplanned departure because termination, frankly, is the board has let the executive go. Unplanned departure would be something like the executive got COVID or came down with something or had to move in the middle of the night or something like that. Was in an accident, things that nobody really plans, but is not necessarily a termination. CEO departure due to death is different than the scenarios I just mentioned. There are resources that the board and an interim director should bring in that are trauma informed and supportive for the staff. And then, of course, these same situations, but with organizations that have been facing challenges. So where things just don't feel right, it's been really tough, there's all sorts of issues, right? And the CEO either resigns, something happens to them, they're terminated, or unfortunately, they pass away while serving. So 8 scenarios to consider. One thing transitions do is they offer a lot of opportunity for introspection if you take it. And that's a big if. But it's an opportunity to really assess the community need and your own mission work. Organizations, people within organizations and people who serve organizations love what they do. They are truly committed to the work and often believe that the work is really valuable and the community can do without it. It's a wonderful time to check in and really get a sense of where is the community and where is the need now compared to when you hired your last executive, when you were founded as an organization, or when you did your last needs assessment. And I mean a deep dive needs assessment. A lot of organizations say, oh, we know we're needed. But short of the time when they were incorporating, really don't deep dive and understand, is that community need still the same? And if it is, are you meeting that need? So great opportunity to really think through that. Identify your own current strengths and challenges as an organization, address long-term sustainability issues, and consider growth opportunities. So when we talk about succession planning, in addition to creating contingencies for various scenarios, a good succession plan could include the pursuit of or discovery for M&A, times when it's right to hire a professional interim, your executive search needs, and the desired processes and persons that you want to use at those times, and realistic timelines for turnover, for organizational turnaround work if that's something you need, and to actually run a search and hire an executive, and then have someone sitting in the chair to help keep things going in the meantime. So without a strong succession plan and without really thinking through whether you need to step back, assess, and bring in someone who can help you with some deep dive work, with some turnaround work, there are some pitfalls that organizations can experience. One is that they just immediately start a search, whether or not an analysis is conducted. I will say that we see this a lot. Boards panic. Board members are volunteers. Lots of people feel like, oh gosh, I didn't sign up for this on my watch. And they just want to get it done. Like, let's hurry up, get an executive in here and get this done. And so a lot of times we see searches conducted without any sort of analysis whatsoever of the organization's life cycle, where they're at, whether they're meeting a community need, what they can afford, or what the executive is even supposed to be doing as an executive. I also see a lot of boards just assume that like any executive will do. Like if you've been an executive director or CEO before, that you're magically qualified to be a CEO of this particular organization. And in my experience, that couldn't be farther from the truth. Every executive role is a little different, and everybody has unique skill sets. And some executive positions just don't align with the not just background and experience, but personal and leadership styles of an executive or of the culture of an organization. So it's really important to ferret that out. Organizations will sometimes assign a board member as an interim executive director. That is a challenge and most times does not work and can create a lot of division within an organization. I'm happy to talk more about that dynamic later if you'd like. Another thing that many organizations will do is they will anoint an internal candidate as an interim executive director. Again, we'll go into this a little further later, but this creates certain issues of its own as well. While it might seem on the surface like you're giving an internal candidate a chance, what you're actually doing is putting that person through a 2 to 6 month interview applies for the job. So it, to some extent, gives the external candidates an unfair advantage. It also creates a dynamic in an organization where, like it or not, no matter how sweet, if you don't have an internal person there, and research shows that they will leave in less than 1 year from when a new executive is hired. So you should be prepared if you're going to anoint an internal candidate to have a succession plan for that person when they leave as well. And then, of course, hiring a professional interim executive director is, of course, something that we champion. We can talk to you more about that in a bit. Let's talk a little bit, though, about why you may need a turnaround leader. And this is where I'd love to be able to entertain questions as they come up. So a lot of times when we're called, there are some signs that there's some things going on in an organization, and the best thing an organization can do is to press pause and think through their next steps. So one is that, the board just has a feeling that things haven't felt right in the organization, like perhaps for years. Sometimes people can pinpoint exactly what the reason is. Sometimes they can't, but they know that something just doesn't feel right. The organization has been in decline without a plan for growth for a long time. I'm going to qualify this and say, even if they have a plan for growth, they just haven't been growing. So sooner or later, the buck stops somewhere. And we've certainly seen organizations like where they've been serving the same number of people for 20, 30, 40 years. The budget has been about the same or declining. The staff are not paid market average. They don't have certain benefits, all these kinds of signs that the organization is just not in growth mode. There's toxicity in the workplace, a lot of toxicity. I think that that is something that I don't have to spend too much time explaining, except to say that it's a mistake not to take the moment to address this. Assuming that you're going to hire a new CEO to come in and fix a bunch of problems sets an organization up for failure. It can be much more beneficial to bring an interim or a turnaround leader in, transitional leader, to help you really sort through some things, clean some things up, realign staff if that's what you need to do, etc. Ready the place for a new leader, and then start your search. Sometimes the numbers don't add up, right? That's a big aha moment. That's not something to bring a new CEO into. And that's really on the board. It's the board is one of the few roles a board has is to be the fiduciary steward of the organizations. If the numbers don't add up, that's on you, and really something that needs to be handled, as soon as possible. If there's been lack of trust between the board and the CEO, even if you hire a new CEO right away, there's a good chance that the residual feelings of lack of trust still linger. And it would be a real shame if you hired a CEO and right off the bat, you didn't trust them because you didn't trust the last person. So taking some time to pause just because the board needs to heal, I think is super important. We don't talk about it enough in the sector. We really don't talk enough about the emotional trauma that board members face. Now, I know as someone who's worked in nonprofits and who has been an executive, that many people in an organization feel that that is overblown because board members really don't spend that much time in the organization. And so, hey, if you think you have it tough, what about us? Like, I understand that. But I think it's important to acknowledge that emotional trauma for board members is real, and it affects their ability to lead and govern an organization. And it's super important to give the board time to press pause and heal a little bit, and then be ready to move on, and work with a new leader in a way that's healthy. So if you have a lot of board turnover, a lot of routine upper management turnover, if you've had a lot of concerns about human resources, compliance, ethics, hiring issues, if you want to move the organization into a different direction and much quicker than you've been able to do, if you're looking for a spark plug for some growth and change, someone who understands change management and so forth, if you know you have to engage in organizational cleanup, if you want a deep dive into, if you want a deep dive in organizational assessment for the board, if you want to really understand the organization better, if you think it's a great time for M&A discovery or implementation, so that's merger and acquisition, and I don't care what we call it, strategic partnerships, alignments, strategic collaborations. At the end of the day, if it's something that is about joining your organization with another to reduce costs and streamline services and so forth, let's just say it's M&A for the purposes of this conversation. Or again, if you want to ready that organization for a new leader, all great reasons to bring a turnaround leader in. We talked a little bit about how I mentioned a little bit about how this is really a good moment to think about those strategic partnerships, think about what the long-term future of the organization is and whether you can better meet those needs by joining forces with another organization or not at this time. And by the way, just exploring, the first phase is really exploration and then discovery. So just exploring and discovering and going down the road doesn't mean you have to merge. And I think that that's a really important consideration, is to keep in mind that your transitional leader, your turnaround leader, your interim executive can help shepherd this process for the board, and that the board could decide that what they really want to do is get bolder about the vision and strategy and hire a new CEO who's going to take them into a new direction without merging. Like, that's okay. Just because you start going down the road to merge doesn't mean you have to get married. I think it's really important to keep that in mind. But I would be remiss if I didn't, mention that this was a really good time to be exploring this. Let's talk about when that professional interim is right for you. Um, so I just want to step back a little bit and talk about what is a professional interim executive director. That professional component I think is really important. So it is someone who intentionally serves as a temporary or transitional leader, um, not necessarily someone who's unemployed right now and just needs a job, or who is looking for a full-time executive position and sees this as a stepping stone. It is a professional field in and of itself. And those of us who serve as professional interims and transitional leaders tend to be trained, certified. They take an oath not to apply for the permanent position, but to really shepherd an organization through change, and to be non-biased, right? To not have a vested interest in the outcome to the point where that sways the work that they're doing in the interim. And I personally think that's incredibly important. And someone who just is genuinely committed to help organizations through a transition. So, those people can bring a fresh, more neutral perspective to an organization, really can serve to tell truth to power to boards of directors. And I think that this is important because a lot of times, part of what ends up happening, for a lot of different reasons, and it's not always on the CEO, let me be really clear about that, but sometimes people are reticent to share things with their boards because the board may not be ready to hear it, or process that information or be open to it, um, or they may just be hiding things sometimes. And so when you bring a transitional leader in, it really is the time where the board is going to get very unfiltered information. So I mean, we can be diplomatic, but it's going to be less filtered because we don't have a vested interest in being your long-term CEO in 5 or 10 years. We're not jockeying for that position. So the board sometimes isn't always ready for that, even when they think they are. And that's something, if you're a board member on this call, to be mindful of. Again, provides a space for the board to reflect and make key decisions. Turnaround leaders can really, and interims can really calm organizations in crisis. I think that's really important for organizations to consider. Help organizations stabilize, course correct, and grow. Again, really talking about that turnaround work. And help to implement changes that will pave the way for the next CEO to be more successful. So really ready, I call it readying the position for your next best leader. When I talk about turnaround work, what am I talking about? Well, needing to address things like finance, human resources, IT, risk and liability issues, financial issues, spearhead some fundraising growth, attempt to repair certain relationships, calm the waters, maybe at the very least, do a full organizational assessment for the board and really identify what is the work of your particular executive or CEO. And then help the organization find that kind of, the kind of person who enjoys doing the kind of work that your particular executive position needs. It's a big, big step that gets skipped. I've mentioned all of these things before, so I'm going to just keep on going. So interims can assist boards. Your turnaround leader or an interim can assist boards with an executive search, can lead operations until a new exec is hired, can help to ready the position for the new CEO. I just mentioned that, and help with M&A. One of the reasons why I think it's so important to think about whether you need a transitional leader is because I know I get phone calls from organizations who will call and say things like, well, we need an interim executive. And then before you even get a chance to call them back, they've decided to put someone in the role. And maybe it's a consultant, maybe it's a board member, maybe it's an internal person, what have you. Then the next thing they ask for is, well, but do you help with strategic planning, and do you do an organizational assessment, and can you come in and do some turnaround work? And what about an executive search? Do you do that? If you're hiring an interim and they're not doing any of that work, then one of two things. Well, there could be a lot of situations, but I think predominantly one of two things are happening. One is that that interim leader did not really fully take on interim work, or the job is too big for them to do all of it. Um, or you needed a turnaround leader, and the person who you hired as your interim doesn't want to do turnaround work. They want to kind of sit in a healthy enough organization for a certain number of hours a week until you hire a new position. That is totally fine. But just like finding, really understanding the role and the scope of your executive position and hiring for that, the same, I believe, really is true when you're hiring for a transitional leader, is that you really want to figure out, what is it that you need this person, or their supportive team to be able to do for you, and then hire for that rather than bringing in 2 or 3 or 5 different professionals to help you with all these different things. The other thing as a consultant that we see when organizations do that, um, is that, whether it's conscious or subconscious, there's issues with trust there. If you're bringing in a number of leaders and consultants who really are not they might all work well enough together, but they're not on the same team. They're all different kinds of consultants in town or abroad and so forth. And they're all doing work that the others can do. That is a sign that there's some other kinds of issues going on at the leadership level of the board as well. But I just wanted to put that out there, that is something that we see as consultants and we're mindful of. So there's some reasons why a professional interim can prevent difficult situations. So we talked about, it staves off having a board or a staff member step into the position. And the power dynamics that brings into play. For board members, first and foremost, if you were on the board and now you're stepping into leadership of the organization, and you stay on the board, you're now opening the organization to a certain level of liability and risk from an HR perspective. So that is really something to be mindful of, especially if you learn things about your employees that are supposed to be kept confidential, and then use that information at the board level to make decisions about employment, hiring, and other things. It's best if I'm not a fan of this model. I've seen it only work 2 times in my entire career. Okay. Those 2 times it's worked pretty well, but generally, a board member stepping into leadership in an organization has not resulted in positive outcomes for organizations because of the power dynamics. And there's power dynamics that you really don't understand as a board member, that the staff and the volunteers see, and that affect the well-being of those individuals in the organization. Bringing a professional interim in sort of stops the jockeying for the permanent position from internal hires, whether they be staff, volunteers, or board members. By the way, I started saying and forgot that if you're a board member and you just can't help but jump into that interim executive role, resign from the board. You should not be serving in both capacities at the same time. It also helps keep people from doing multiple jobs not very well, and then that being held against them later after a new executive comes in. Let's see here. I talked about interim or board members applying for the long-term position and then not getting it and having to address the sort of internal PR and sometimes external PR issues related to that. There are compensation issues that sometimes need to be addressed if you've put an internal person into the role, increase their salary. Now they move back into another role and you want to rescind the salary, big problems. You need to be really careful about that from an HR perspective. And then we talked about the sensitive organizational and human resource issues. I just want to move to questions and thoughts that anyone might have about the presentation or the topic. I'd love to have a more detailed conversation at this point if you have any questions. Cynthia, are you seeing anything in the queue? I'm not.
There is not. No, I don't see any questions or anything. Did anyone have any questions? Oh, Brittany says this is all really helpful. Nope, no formal
Well, thank you, Brittany.
questions.
I'm finally seeing the chat. I was like, where is it? I see the numbers. There we go. You know, while we have a little bit of time, I want to touch on something else for those of you who are on the call, who are staff at organizations. Oh, Kathleen, absolutely. I completely agree with you. When there's not clarity around the role of the person stepping in, it can cause a lot of problems. And that's a reason why having the succession plan, but also having a job description, for this person, and you can use your executive job description, or for those of us who are consultants and serve in this role, we write up, I can say I do, and my team does, we write up a contract with the client. And we delineate, what it is we'll be doing and what it is we won't be doing as interim executives. And so it's clear. Now the client is the board at that point. And so sometimes the board will share, sometimes they will undershare, sometimes they will overshare with the employees. But it's incumbent on you as the transitional leader, the interim, to bring that clarity to the staff. If, when you join, to let them know what it is you're there to do, and how you'll be a resource to them and how you will support them. I can say that those of us who serve in these capacities know that people are usually not ready to welcome us with open arms. Like, you have to have thick skin, and you sort of expect that people have been through a lot. They might be friendly, they want to give you a chance, but they also might be a bit shocked with all the change that's happening. Even if someone's leaving on great terms and the organization is healthy, boy, now it's about how we lost someone great and we're never going to find someone great. If someone left and people didn't think they were great, there's a lot of trauma around that and so forth. So when you step in as an interim leader, it's really important to be very clear about your role and honest and transparent with people as much as possible. And just know that there is, Kathleen, I'm reading your chat. She says often members, staff, and supporters align politically with persons, initiatives, or resistances during times of change. They absolutely do. And we know that. And so It's important to be a support for the team, but also to help leave the organization better than where you left it. Knowing that you can't, it's not your job to fix everything as a transitional leader. So we tend to identify the biggest issues, right, that really need to be aligned. I didn't spend a lot of time talking about alignment in this presentation. I usually do, but I think that is key. Really trying to get an organization to a point where there's a certain level of alignment in mission, vision, values, priorities, um, and and goals, from the board to the executive to the staff. What I was going to say earlier to staff is to be mindful about engaging in behaviors that can come back to bite you. So this is another sort of taboo that we don't talk about, right? But I can't tell you how many organizations we go into as turnaround leaders or as interim leaders, and the staff have contacted the board and they've gone around processes and they've circumvented leaders, and they think that somehow by doing that, you're going to be more heard and your agenda is going to get forwarded. And you might be right about issues. But I think it's really important to respect the internal processes and attempt to follow them before engaging in that kind of behavior. And it's especially the case to do so when you have an interim or transitional leader in the seat who is going to be looking for that kind of behavior. So I'm going to put it out there. Right? This is your magic moment in my seminar. We're going to be looking for that kind of behavior in an organization, and thinking through whether that's healthy for the long-term future of the organization, and whether all the folks who are engaging in those kinds of behaviors are actually doing their jobs in a way that is innovative, effective, client-centered. So, it's really the time, I think, for a certain level of transparency, of support for staff. And support isn't always like flowers and coffee, right? Like support is really about learning who your staff are and what their professional desires might be, how you can help to get them to a place in their careers where they thrive, and that might not be in the organization. Being really transparent that you support their well-being and you're willing to support them whether they feel like they want to stay or need to go, and that support is not punitive. I mean, I think that that's really important, and something that a transitional leader needs to do. But it is also a time for us to think about how do we help organizations become healthier if they're not, realizing there's only so much we can do. But so if folks are engaging in behaviors that are less than desirable in a workplace, and with the board, and if the board members are doing that as well, those are the kinds of things that a transitional leader is going to help get on track for you as well. So I just want to put that out there. I think there's some taboos we don't talk about, but that are it's great to have some candid conversations around. Any other thoughts, questions from the chat? I'm going to give people a few more minutes. I rarely end early, but I'm all about found time. So if there are no other questions for today, those are the comments I've prepared, the conversation I've prepared, and I'm happy to stay and answer any questions one-on-one if you have them, or answer any additional questions at this time. And in the meantime, if you think of anything, just pop it in the chat. I want to thank all of you for coming today. I know it's the sort of start of a holiday weekend, and I really appreciate your time. I think it's an important topic, and I'm so glad that you joined us today for it. You know, a little bit of shameless promotion, right? So Raise the Bar Consulting, been in business for 12 years. We provide comprehensive fundraising, organizational development, transitional leadership, and interim executive solutions. And I'm happy to have a conversation one-on-one with you at any time if that would be of benefit to you. While we're still on the call, I wanted to ask Cynthia to, and we've got one more chat here. Let's see. It seems as though the ED is the usual conduit between the board and the staff. What is a healthy way to replace that during transition? Well, Kathleen, I'll say that, you know, where bringing a professional interim in and it working well, you know, what that does is it continues that continuity of having someone in that space during that time and still serving in that way. I've also seen that a lot of times this is not what's actually happening in an organization. And so if you bring a turnaround leader in, especially, one of the things they might do is help to rebuild that structure on the board side and on the staff side so that everyone has a common expectation of what the CEO's role is and what their own roles are and should be, and that there are processes in place to engage in corrective action if folks are not serving in whatever way seems right in an organization. Now, this is dependent on your communications policies, structure, your leadership structure. Of course, there are some organizations that are less hierarchical and they may be all volunteer. So it's not a one size fits all, but for many organizations, you know, if you have a paid executive or CEO, plenty of staff and a board, usually you're right, you know, that ED, that executive is the conduit between the board and the staff, and during transitional or turnaround leadership should be as well. I want to ping pong over to Cynthia to share with us who our upcoming presenters are going to be while everyone's still on the call. Cynthia? You're on mute. You're welcome. So we present every 2 weeks. So the next presentation is going to be January.
Sorry.
July 15th. And now I'm going to pass it over to Cynthia.
Yeah, sorry. But I was like, where's, of course, like
Okay.
as I scramble, can't find anything. I'm only on this platform every single day. All right. Sorry about that, everyone. So our next presentation, we're doing them every other Thursday. So our next presentation in July will be the 15th with Debbie Stanley from Pursuant. And it will be at 2:00 Pacific time as well. And then our last one for the month of July is the 29th with Jeff Troyer of art. Do you remember what?
Yeah, and I'm going to give a plug right here. I do. I'm going to plug this. So, Debbie's presentation from Pursuant, they do a unique form of donor research. So it's not just wealth analysis. It's a little more complicated and interesting, I think. I would say definitely chime in. Many organizations are still not doing comprehensive donor research, so they don't know who to contact, and donor contact is still like, you know, just trying to find a needle in a haystack kind of thing. So I really like Pursuant's approach, and they're very focused on who has the propensity to give to your organization, not just who has the wealth to do it. So there's going to be great stuff there. And then Jeff Troyer is with Automated Response Technologies, and they're all about voice broadcasting. So we're moving into the fundraising portion of our webinar series, and Jeff is going to talk with you about how voice broadcasting can really help enhance your campaign responses. And, you know, I'll say I tested Jeff's product with a few clients this year, and you know, even clients for whom we were doing, you know, really well supporting their annual fundraising campaigns when they added this technology, just saw their returns really skyrocket. So very affordable service. I think it's just great information to share, and I hope you'll all come out for that one too.
Does anyone have any last minute questions or comments? Nope.
All right, well, if that's all, thank you so much everyone for joining us today. I hope you have a lovely long weekend, however you are celebrating or not celebrating it. At the very least, celebrate you. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.